If you're going to buy a house and not use a realtor to represent you, here's going to be 8 tips that I'm going to give you so to make sure that you make the home a successful transaction for yourself. Number 1, have some awareness that there is a realtor that is and more than likely will represent the seller of the home that you're trying to purchase. So if you're a buyer and you don't want to use a realtor because you want to transact that property and negotiate by yourself, that could be perfectly okay. But just know that when you do have communications, you are going to be talking to the realtor that represents the seller and the interest of that seller. So when you do talk with them, you have to have an understanding of what items you're going to negotiate and how you're going to proceed with actually purchasing that property. Same thing goes with a builder. The representatives at a builder have a real estate license that actually represent the builder's interests. And the majority of the time, what typically happens is that us as consumers and potential home buyers, we will walk into the builder and look at their model home, and then we'll get attended by the builder's representatives. Now, they're going to do a fantastic job, as they should, to take care of you, to give you the information that you need. However, what you do need to know is that their representation and their fiduciary duties lies with the builder. So they're not going to tell you everything you need to know if it defeats the purpose of their fiduciary duty to the builder that they work. So just take extra caution to be aware that the representation piece is important when you're dealing without a realtor that represents the buyer's interests versus representing the seller's interests. The second tip that I'm going to give you is you want to make sure that you're familiar with a real estate contract. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to wait to the last minute to familiarize yourself with the contract, okay? The reason why is because when you're making an offer and you really love a house, you don't want to be under any kind of stress to be reactive and try to read everything at the last minute, because you may feel that you might lose out on that property. So you may start skimming things and not really understand what you're signing. So one of the very first things that I'm going to recommend is that you get a contract and actually feel out what every paragraph and what the verbiage means, and where are things that can work to your favor and things that can work out of your favor. So familiarize yourself with this process. And if you guys do need a copy of a contract, please let me know, and I'll be more than happy to provide it to you. And there will be a nice little tip at the end of this video that will actually help you with this process as well. So make sure you stick around for that one. Tip number 3 is hire a real estate attorney. Now, you may not have to have real estate representation, but what you might want to do is hire a real estate attorney to be able to research some of the verbiage on the contract. Now, if you're going to be proactive with this, you might want to hire that person early on in the process to have an understanding on how they communicate with you and how they interpret things on a contract to you so that you could understand it. Now, every state is different, so depending on where you're at, it may already be required that you would have to have a real estate attorney. In the state of Florida, we don't have to have one. It's optional, and it could be recommended, especially if you're not using an agent to actually represent your interests. Tip number 4, what you could probably do is you could hire a real estate agent to see if they will be open to representing you just for the contract to close process, meaning they're not necessarily showing you the houses and using their resources and their time to find you a house. Maybe you've already located the house on your own. However, you do want representation to actually have someone make that offer for you, take it all the way to closing. And all you really need to do is communicate what your intentions are with a real estate agent, make sure that they're on board with it, and make sure that you guys are very much transparent as to how the compensation is going to occur. Because the compensation could occur with you paying that realtor at closing, or maybe you can actually structure it into the terms of an offer where it's either built in the price, or it's actually built in the concessions of the actual contract. Therefore, you're being a little bit more alleviated as to having to pay out of pocket. This helps everybody because at this point, all you really need assistance with is the paperwork part and the guidance of the process, not so much in the showing of the properties part, which can be very time consuming for everybody. Tip number 5, the diligence part of a contract to close is imperative. And it's super important that you guys understand the knowledge aspect of the inspection period and the due diligence to try to avoid something that may not be in your favor. And what I mean by that is you want to get an understanding of the process of the inspection period as to when it's ordered, when it's performed, when do you get the report, what are to your benefits and what is not to your benefit when it comes to you actually dictating if you're going to proceed, if you're going to request for repairs, is the seller going to accept it? And more importantly, are you communicating everything in the proper way that actually protects you and protects your deposit money? So it's imperative to have a really good understanding of this process to protect yourselves from losing money or losing the property. Number 6, the contingencies. Now, we talked a little bit about the finance or the home inspection contingency, but now we're going to talk a little bit more about the financing and the appraisal contingencies, because you want to make sure that everything is set in order and done by a specific deadline date. And having an understanding of these two things is absolutely imperative to protect your deposit money and to make sure that everything goes smooth. So one of the things that I could talk to you guys about is the appraisal contingency. When you look at a home that you've found on your own, you are going to see a price of that home, or you're going to come into negotiations with the realtor of that seller or the seller directly. And you guys are going to come up with a price that seems kind of fair. So one of the things we need to be concerned with that is the property going to appraise for the agreement that you guys come under? And how are you going to know that? And if it doesn't appraise, are you prepared to know how you're going to pivot from that situation? Let's think about a process and hypothetical situation where you go under contract with someone on a home. Everything is moving forward, then the inspection process goes to everyone's favor, and then the appraisal is ordered. The appraisal happens and it comes up short to what the agreement is. If you don't have the proper disclosures in place, there is a possibility that you could actually lose your deposit money regardless if the property appraised or not. So this is an imperative piece to understand and prepare before it actually happens so that you understand how you're going to pivot. And now the financing contingency is something also you need to consider, because you're going to have a certain amount of time as a buyer to get the loan approval from the mortgage lender. And this is obviously assuming that you're getting financing for the property. But you need to know what those deadline dates are. You need to know what happens if for some reason you're not able to meet that deadline date. How are you going to communicate to that seller to protect yourself, but more importantly, to protect the deposit money that you put up front? Tip number 7, you guys have heard me several times through this process talk about deposit and earnest money. And this is one of the most imperative things that you're going to want to protect yourself, because that deposit money is always at risk should something not go as according to the plan that you've put out there. The very first thing that you need to know is that deposit money is collected by a third party. And that third party is going to hold on to that deposit money. And you need to understand in what scenarios is this money going to be lost, and in what scenarios is this money actually going to show as a credit for you at closing. When you get a clear vision of that, it's going to help you understand what it is exactly you're protecting and at what moments can you actually risk losing the money that you worked hard for. Last but not least, number 8, the seller property disclosures. The seller property disclosures is something that we typically provide to our sellers that we are representing. We want to make sure that these disclosures are all completed by the seller to the best of their knowledge, and it's going to actually disclose to the best of the seller's ability if they see anything that's wrong with the home. And it's a pretty thorough disclosures. Now, what it typically happens is that a seller may not really know if there's something leaking under the roof, because most of the time we don't know these things that are behind the walls. And if they're not apparent to us, then we're just going to say that the roof has never leaked before. You have to move with caution, but you also want to protect yourself, because if there is knowledge that something is wrong with the house and it's not disclosed, that could be a huge legal problem for the parties that are involved in transacting into a home. And I've seen it time and time again with stuff that has to do with sinkholes, with drain fields, with the roof. These are things that sometimes as sellers, we don't know what we don't know, but it doesn't mean that you are not to disclose it and take the proper steps to make sure that you're protected, not just as a buyer, but if you're a seller actually watching this video. I hope these steps helped you guys out in how to be able to take a little bit of caution and move through the process of buying a house without using a real estate agent. I would highly encourage that you do, to protect you, and just make sure that you talk to multiple real estate agents so that you have a good feel for someone who understands you and communicates with you to be able to accomplish what you're looking for. Now, if you do need a video tutorial about how to write an offer, please make sure you message me and I'll be more than happy to send it. Make sure you check out some of these other videos.